introduce Don Harrison. I met Don about 5 years ago, I think, at the Napier Convention, and what I love about Don is his forthright way of expression, which I'm sure you'll all enjoy.
Don't answer that.
No. The past is colourful, the present is amazing, and the future is looking even better. These are Don's words. I became a Theosophist some 9 years ago and haven't looked back.
Oh dear.
I've also studied the human condition for nearly a decade in order to understand who we are, how we are, and why we are the way we are. Now it's heart over head and not the other way around. So welcome, Don. Thank you.
Cheers, thank you. I hope as I stand here, I look like the epitome of peace and tranquility.
Thank you, Patrick.
We'll get to that.
Hang on, I get my worship post.
However, the reality is quite different. Because of the previous speakers, I've written this out 3 times, and 3 times it's gone in the bin. And I got to the point where I've really started to run out of material because it's all been covered. And I've got to the point now where the mind's going, you've got nothing written down, you are completely unprepared, I have no certainty, I have no clarity.
But you have got me.
It's not like you're going to help. And the panic button has been pushed by the mind. But however, the heart's going, settle down, I've got this. Just sit down and behave yourself.
Hang on, I'll take a more humble position.
So, here we go, and I think probably for most of us like myself, we spend probably more time in our head than we really need to or like to. And we pore over stuff constantly and we churn it around and we mull over it, and what are we doing when we're doing all of this? Ultimately I think we're looking for some level of understanding to solve the problem that's present in the moment, or looking to ease our suffering in some way, and we just keep revisiting it and churning over it, and we don't seem to be really getting where most of the time. And the mind, even when we're busy doing stuff, is still in the background ticking over at sometimes a very unpleasant pace, and then we get to the end of the day and say, I'm just going to go to sleep now. And then we lie down in the bed and the eyes are wide open and you're looking at the ceiling and the mind hasn't finished for the day.
Before you go to sleep.
Well, it's difficult to do that when the mind won't let you because you're locked into it. Because there's problems to solve, and mostly your own. But generally we're trying to save other people's problems to avoid having to deal with our own. Nice diversion. So anyway, I thought this is probably more for my benefit than yours, but I thought, well, let's just try and get out of our head for a minute and get in touch.
I can't do that.
Well, you just behave yourself, will you?
I'm listening. The lady said listen. I've forgotten your lady there, yes. I'm listening.
Sit. So what we'll do is we'll get everyone to close your eyes and we'll do a little exercise that's going to take us into our heart. So with your eyes closed, breathing gently, relaxing, soft in the mouth and kind in the eyes. Breathing gently in and out. Right, I invite you to take 3 deep, full breaths and bring yourself back to this present moment of awareness. How did that feel? Some feedback from someone? Nice.
Stillness.
Yeah. Feel very different from being in your head? Yeah. Nice place to be, isn't it? If that's the case, why do we spend so much time in our head?
This is the tea issue, know.
And that's the answer.
Yes, well, there's the problem in itself, isn't it? Perhaps the reason is possibly that the eyes are the window to the soul, but the heart is where we carry all our hurt and woundedness from the affairs of our life and the suffering that we've been through. And we store it all there away for some reason, because we generally don't know how to deal with it, or it's just too difficult, too painful, and the memories are just far too profound. And yet we all carry this. So we find that generally it's safer and less painful to spend the majority of our time in our heads. I mean, after all, the mind's a wonderful thing, isn't it? It can give us certainty and clarity and predict into the future and plan things, and it's absolutely fantastic if you want to buy a new washing machine. You know, you'll compare everything that's comparable and make the whole thing predictable. And you'll come out with an outcome and you go, I'll take it. But it's a little bit of a soulless exercise, isn't it? There's not really any emotion or anything involved in it, so it's a little bit of an empty process, and there's certainly not really any fulfilment to be had from that. I mean, imagine buying a washing machine with your heart. I'm sure it would be a very different process. I mean, how would the guy in the store behave if you went up and gave it a hug? You'd probably get security called on you in no time flat. Get out, we don't need your kind in here. Well, as per the other talks that have gone before us, talking about connection and compassion and suffering, I thought we might look at what's going on with ourselves and the dynamics of that, and why we find it so difficult to deal with matters of the heart. Because generally the pain of that and our inability to have the management skills to deal with that usually just puts it all in the too hard basket. So what I found with my observations is that when we're hurt and wounded, we carry this around and we guard our heart, and you know, we think that we'd like to live more wholeheartedly and connect with other people and form relationships, but we only ever really go so far, because sitting in the back of our mind is always the thought that if I open up and allow myself to be vulnerable, as per the past, there may be a chance that I might get taken advantage of. I might be ridiculed or condemned or become an outcast, full stop, because it's not approved of. So we always hold back a little bit, and we only try and measure how much we're going to open up with any one person we meet until we can gauge whether it's safe enough to do so or whether we just retreat completely. But while all of that's happening, just in the background, just behind, percolating away, is that ever-present fear. That fear that if I do open myself up, I could find myself in big trouble again. And that fear is present, and it's probably quite necessary in some regards. But if we want to heal the heart, then we've got to deal with what's keeping it closed. And usually the root of that comes from our relationships. Fantastic, aren't we all? And especially some of our personal relationships. They can potentially be the most damaging for us in our lives. I mean, you get to our age, I doubt there's anybody in this room that isn't dragging around some baggage somewhere. Let's be honest about that. So we drag around our baggage, and sure, we can drag it around our whole lives if we really want, but as we get older, we get weaker, the bag gets bigger, and it gets harder to drag around. So if we want to grow, we've got to do something about it. So at some point, we're going to have to drag the whole lot into the light of day, kicking and screaming, and rummage through it and sort it out. And usually the thing that gives us the most trouble is those hardcore base emotions that we haven't learned how to deal with, we're never taught to, never given the management skills. So we just sort of carry that hard, heavy energy of that around with us our entire lives. And the problem with those heavy emotions that we carry around is the mind will kick in and go, I've got a story that goes with that. And we write a story that suits us. And it usually falls in our favour. Of course. But it's a version of the truth. But it is not the truth. And therein lies the problem. Because the story we tell and believe supports how we feel. And how we feel supports the story. And when we visit our suffering, we churn this over and we go from one to the other. We go from the story back to the emotion, feel the feelings, repower and re-energise the story, and go back to the story, and we just ruminate on this. And it just churns around and around and around. And there's no solution to be seen anywhere. And the problem is we're trying to solve this with the mind. But unfortunately, the mind is extremely unreliable. It's a profound liar, for starters. And it all started with the first story that you told. Because it wasn't even the truth. It was a version of it. So, an example is two brothers have a fight. And they go their separate ways. And 40 years later, they're still not talking to each other. And you talk to one brother and he starts telling the story, and he can't even remember what the fight was about. So, you press him a little bit, and he will instantly fill the gaps with a new story. And, of course, leaning in his favour, of course. and he'll rewrite the story as required in the moment, right then and there. How can you possibly work with that? Profuse liar, extremely unreliable. It's not like you're going to get the honest truth out of it, are you? Well, let's be honest. But however, when you ask him about how he feels about that, the feelings from 40 years ago, as hard and as raw as they are, can be brought to the present moment in the blink of an eye. And in that moment, they've transcended time and space, and they've lost none of their power in the 40 years that have gone by. Now that's reliable. That's what we can work with. So we pick up the emotions that are in play with the suffering that's gone in our lives, and we look at those emotions, and then we have to pick up the story again and go, is the story true? And does it serve me? The majority of the time, both of those answers are no. But the chances are we wrote that story a long time ago and we embellished it a little bit, and it's become a little bit more colourful over time. But what we need to do is go back to the story, and we need to be honest with ourselves and honest about the players that were involved in our suffering. And we need to tell the story a little bit more accurately and a bit more honestly about what was going on. Because the reality is when we wrote our own story, there was absolutely no consideration for the other people who were involved in that interaction. It was all about us. Yay! So, if we actually go to those people, if we can, or we can just analyse it a little bit more clearly than what we did 40 years ago, we can paint a very different picture of what the story was really like. And we can find out that those that were involved had struggles of their own that we weren't aware of. And they were doing trench warfare day by day as well. And the reality is they probably did what they needed to do on that day for themselves. And that was it. They were just trying to manage their own lives. They weren't malicious or deliberately trying to do anything to you. And when we rewrite our story, there's a couple of things that kind of happen in the subconscious along the way of that journey. Because we've attempted to become more understanding about what's really going on. But in that space, when we know the story of the other players, we automatically become more compassionate and empathetic, and we become forgiving as to what's actually going on. And then when we turn back to our emotions and look at those, we find that they no longer serve us, and they probably never did until we actually got it and we got real with ourselves. And the thing is with those emotions is once we've got no story to hang them on, there's no energy left for them. And they just fall away. The energy just melts away, goes through a process of alchemy, and we finish up with these higher attributes that we didn't have before. We're now more calmer and centered and balanced, because the mind is always looking for peace and understanding. And when you deliver that to it, there's nothing to look for. And the mind will automatically settle and become still.
Do you mean the mind or the heart searching for peace and understanding?
No, the mind searching for peace and understanding. And once it gets the understanding and the resolution that it's been looking for, there's nothing left to search for. So it settles down. And what's happening with the heart, instead of carrying around this woundedness that we have, and being sad and hurt and ashamed and guilty and angry, we carry around these higher faculties that are now able to us. So there's a shift energetically within us as to who we are and how we are in the world all of a sudden. And then we start to see the world quite differently, because we're not looking through our woundedness at everything that we see in the world. And what this does is, when the heart feels well, we are more able to step through feeling vulnerable and afraid, and more into being our authentic selves and living a more authentic and wholehearted life. And surely that's a much better way to be in the world. And when we can do that, and we undergo this process of self-transformation and healing our own suffering, like being on an aeroplane that's crashing, they say put your own mask on first before you help anyone else. So this is the work that we have to do. This is what Theosophy is all about. And if you don't believe me, just drag out your chakra chart and have a look at it. Because it wasn't written by me, but it's very clear as to the process of our evolution. We start at the bottom, we get some trauma and damage along the way, we try and clean it all up, and when we get up to our heart, we are then able to give and receive freely. And because of that, we are then able, perhaps for the first time in our life, to form deep, really deep, meaningful connections with people. And there's no fear ticking away in the background. We live wholeheartedly, and we live more balanced, because we're living from our heart and we live from our head, and we can swap between the two at any time when necessary. And we become more balanced and even more centered and more whole than what we were. Because being in damage control a lot of the time requires an awful lot of energy. And if we split our energy in half, it means we don't have enough for the things that really matter. The faculties of the heart when it's open: grace, beauty, creativity, joy and love. And when we have those things present in our lives, how can we but not have a beautiful life? And a beautiful life is all what we're here for, isn't it?
Yes. Say something.
Are you
about,
asleep?
Yes, I was. No, say something about the throat chakra.
Yeah.
Because I mean, you're demonstrating it at the minute, so you may as well say something.
Yeah, okay.
You can have an extra 5 of mine. Keep going.
Okay. So, okay, answering.
I've got a question.
Yeah, okay. When our heart is open, it enables us to speak our truth. But instead of coming from the lower mind, it comes from the heart. And we all know when we see people who come from the heart, like our superheroes, the t-shirt I had on this morning, we love and revere them, and we wish we could be more like them, because they live wholeheartedly, and they appear to be fearless even when they are. They overcome the challenges, they step up, and they do what needs to be done when it needs to be done, and we love them for it because they save the rest of us from ourselves mostly.
John.
What happens when you don't deal with that pain or resolve that pain or process that pain in this life?
A heart attack.
That's a
I've had a
very
couple of those. So.
Yeah, you're on your way.
Our emotions are literally just energy with a name. Depending on what emotion's in play, it dictates the density and the heaviness of the emotion that we carry. Generally, as a rule, we carry our hurt in our heart, and we carry our anger in our liver, no surprise. Fear usually resides in our kidneys, sadness in our lungs, and there's a few others spread around the place. And we carry the whole lot with us wherever we go. Now, the nature of energy is very much like water. When it's flowing, it's the sustenance of life, and it's a beautiful, wonderful thing. It's crystal clear and it twinkles and it gives life to everything.
You mean not stagnant?
No.
No.
But if we stop it from flowing, that's what happens. It becomes stagnant, stale, poisonous and toxic. And then it has the ability to start causing us some real trouble. And usually that energy that's trapped within our body as a blockage somewhere will present itself as some form of dis-ease. And when it does, we usually just rush off to the doctor and get some pills. And then we find ourselves locked into a system where we're being medicated constantly, and I get some relief, but it's not really sorting it out. And then the doctor's going, oh, you need surgery, we're going to carve you open and sort it out. And then there's more medication afterwards. But I think if we want to bring about change, instead of pandering around dealing with band-aid solutions, we've got to get to the root cause of what's going on within ourselves. Because that's where the answers are, and that's where the solutions are as well. So if we want to be wholehearted and live in the world the best we can, we're going to have to do the work. There's no avoiding it, I'm afraid. On that note, thank you very much.